For a man that says he doesn't like mascot platformers as much as other genres, he sure as shit has covered a number on his channel. In all fairness, mascots were like crack cocaine to younger me, as I couldn't tell you how many Sonic, Mario, Spyro, and other games from the first 3 mascot booms I either owned or rented. An addendum to my earliest Sonic memories was suffering through Crazy Gadget as a and I feel that I have to stress this, I don't hate mascot platformers, they just aren't my preferred cup of tea. It's like me and Coke. I'll drink one, but I prefer Black Tar Pepsi more. With that odd analogy out of the way, let's talk about Sly Cooper in the Thievius Raccoonus. My introduction to Sly Cooper, damn you Kid Icarus for the Mandela effect, as no, Cooper isn't slang for penis, and Sly Cock, pick your poison, grants too much power to the furries, which is something I won't abide by, is much like some of the other games I've covered for the channel, in reverse. Honor Among Thieves, the 3rd game in the series, was my first exposure to the Cooper franchise, a terrible introduction narratively, as the gang of 3 was split up by that point and Bentley was in a wheelchair. Yeah, there's important story beats to this series, some I'd like to ignore more than others. See Sly 4, but in my infantile blastulation, I was left confused, so I did what any sane individual would do and go backwards. Not to the beginning, however. After a short stint with Band of Thieves, turns out I suck at babby stealth when my prefrontal cortex is still trying to evolve, I bought the original off eBay. And boy was I in for a surprise, something that those in the peanut gallery and inner circle can surmise if any of you have played this franchise before. Our beginning point of reference doesn't start out of the ether, but within one of the big 3 of games development. Microsoft, though not during the time period that we know them for in the industry, as their rivalry with Sony and to a lesser extent Nintendo wasn't even on the cusp of burgeoning, let alone heating up. No, we start further back to around the time of MS-DOS. But before I can regale you with a diatribe about an era of gaming that I wasn't born into, turns out that while I may have the soul of a boomer, I ain't one, I'm more focused on the actual operating systems Microsoft was pushing out. Mostly because the 6 individuals we'll be casing out got their start with computer programming, where the developer sucker punch had its birth. The 6 people who would leave Microsoft post Windows 95, insert a joke here about that garbage OS, were Brian Fleming, Chris Zimmerman, Bruce Oberg, Daryl Plank, Tom Saxton, and Kathy Saxton. Of the 6, the most important are Fleming, Zimmerman, and Oberg, with Zimmerman the one to knock over the starting domino. As he recounts to IGN within their History of Sucker Punch article, we were in the same group at Microsoft, and then we kind of worked together on and off over the next 8 or 9 years. It started with me. I started getting disenchanted with my life at Microsoft and was thinking about doing something new. On a day trip to see the special editions of the original Star Wars trilogy, Zimmerman told Fleming and Oberg his plan: leave Microsoft and form a game developer. A plan that Fleming ultimately agreed to see out, but it took some cajoling for Oberg to finally join the small developer. Ironic, seeing as he was the one that would slightly spur the development of Sucker Punch's first game towards the Nintendo 64. Turns out the likes of Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings hit different when most of the games you played were Rail Tycoon and Pong. Zimmerman tells IGN, it was before any of us had gaming PCs, right? I mean, I was playing games at that point, but it was all 2D stuff, Railroad Tycoon and whatever. So seeing this consumer bit of electronics that was actually doing 3D stuff was cool. I mean, I played Wolfenstein and Doom and all those games, but somehow it was different, you know? Mario was different. Of course, before Zimmerman and Fleming left Microsoft, they took stock of what everyone else was doing, checking out the likes of Abe's Odyssey, which also had an impact on the small team. While they had cut their teeth on the technical aspects working at Microsoft, they weren't artists. Hell, they disliked the management side of the games industry, Zimmerman speaking for the 3 with, "We just wanted to build product." Fleming adding, the idea of having a publisher was actually really appealing to us because it meant that we didn't need to deal with marketing and sales and all the things that I just don't think are our strengths. We didn't want to do that part. And video games had this business model that let us focus on the technical and creative and not focus on the stuff that was not our background. I mean, we were creators of things, not people who made our career selling things. Notably worried about working with the higher-end PlayStation 1, Zimmerman and Fleming chose the weaker 64 as a staging point for their first outing. One small issue, though. A name. I've been referring to the group as Sucker Punch for sake of simplicity, but around this point, a name hadn't been chosen. Out comes the list. While Fleming and Zimmerman were hanging out to decide on what their company should be called, they recalled a list of Microsoft project names that Zimmerman's wife read aloud. From her mouth, hey, these are all okay, well, not Sucker Punch. Thus, Sucker Punch was chosen. Founding the company on March Madness gambling winnings, mostly because you have to legally say that aloud, there were a few trips and foibles on the way to Sucker Punch's first project, Sprocket. The team, as in Zimmerman, Fleming, and Oberg, weren't used to development culture, mostly because when they approached Nintendo, they got gut-checked by the conglomerate. From the IGN article, Nintendo and Microsoft are right down the street from one another, relatively speaking, and Fleming figured he'd go to Nintendo, sign up to make a game, and get the hardware necessary to get started, but Nintendo stonewalled him, telling him he needed some sort of mysterious approval before they gave Sucker Punch access to development units, tool libraries, and all the rest. Fleming described he and his partners as being completely stunned by Nintendo's unwillingness to work with them, and it left them frustrated. They needed a prototype of an idea for Nintendo to possibly put the game on the 64, as in they weren't going to publish it, so through their own money and without development kits, Sucker Punch, which had grown by a few dozen members, planned out the first world of Sprocket on the PC with a controller setup akin to the 64. This didn't stop them from pitching the game to anyone who would listen, Sony included. In steps Grady Hunt, the most well-known producer at Sony, with titles ranging under his belt from cult classics like Medieval and Resistance Fall of Man, to some of the other mascot games of the third boom like Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank, to rightful holder of Game of the Year 2020, Ghost of Tsushima. His resume was going to be packed in the near future, as around the late 90s his biggest projects were Crashed, Warped, and Spyro 2, so Sucker Punch's meeting with him near the turning point of his tenure at Sony was important. Even if the company didn't pick up Sprocket, he was the foot in the door for later. As Hunt explains to IGN, I believe our first meeting was late 98, early 99, and Sucker Punch had come to us. They had brought a game that looked like it was pretty close to being done, and it ended up being Rocket Robot on Wheels. I think at the time they were calling it Sprocket. They showed us the game, and it was obviously a pretty interesting title. It was more of a mechanics-driven title than a character-driven title, if that makes any sense. We looked at it and there's a lot of positives there. But the two nails that snuffed out that deal was that Sony wasn't going to publish a port of a game that was going to be first released on a rival competitor's console, and that Sprocket lacked character. Again, this was in the midst of the second mascot boom with Crash and Spyro running about, so not having a face to plaster on your box hurt your game in the long run. So Sucker Punch continued to sell their game to publishers with little success, the three founders learning the language of the industry. As Fleming remembers, they, publishers, will absolutely not say no. They will tell you they like it and they want you to come back in a couple of months if you've addressed a couple concerns. That is actually how they say no. It took us the entirety of that project to understand that because we actually thought they were really excited about it. But in fact, they weren't, and I think they weren't for a bunch of reasons. The first of which is kind of just a profound misunderstanding of the market by us, which is that publishers do not have a way of picking up a 70 or 80% complete game, and pitching for us lasted a year. Sucker Punch's last two hopes were THQ and EA, but both fell through for different reasons. While I can't say for certain why THQ backed out of the deal, they did so around E3 99, a terrible time to be dropped for Sucker Punch, which left them scrambling towards EA, who basically told them to stop working on Sprocket and work on a new game for the PlayStation 2. Zimmerman posits to IGN that, so we go, we're at EA and we're actually fairly close. Rocket is almost done and EA's actually interested, legitimately interested, like we're talking terms with them on this. And then they talk it over and we have a meeting with Larry Probst and John Riccitello is there, and we have this meeting with the EA bigwigs and they've decided, not irrationally, that they actually want us. They want the company, but they don't want the game. They don't want Rocket, they don't want to launch Rocket. And so what they offer us is a fairly big check to just put the game in the chipper and start new on a PlayStation 2 title for them. Not about to let all that effort go to waste, Sucker Punch walked away from EA, but this whole circus did have an interesting ripple effect. Without a publisher, Sucker Punch could walk into E3 with a guerrilla-style marketing approach. The boys knew how to launch products from their Microsoft days. And so when gaming press caught wind of Sprocket and positively wrote up the game and the story behind it, Ubisoft was attracted to the project. However, there was one concerning issue with the partnership between Sucker Punch and Ubisoft: the name. Sprocket was apparently already copyrighted, and when that was brought up, Sucker Punch changed the name to Rocket, giving us the finished title of Rocket Robot on Wheels. However, an IGN article does present the idea that it may have been Sucker Punch not wanting to challenge Ubisoft, a line reading as such. Sucker Punch, the developers of the game, seemed okay with the idea of the new name, but may simply be giving in to Ubisoft's tough guy intimidation tactics. Speculation aside, as who doesn't like a good old-fashioned bit of alleging, we already know Ubisoft is run by alleged dullards, Rocket came out to mixed perceptions. As Game Informer mentions, it didn't sell extraordinarily well, but it was well received by critics. The game holds an 81% on the review aggregate site Game Rankings, and even managed to win a Game of the Year nod from gaming site Games Radar. It was enough to convince Sucker Punch that it was in the right industry. They just needed to come up with a game idea that had public appeal and would help them pay the bills. In a bit of irony, it was Rocket that springboarded Sucker Punch into the position they have today, all because of a certain villain within Rocket. As Zimmerman writes for a blog post on PlayStation.com, we have been on Team Sony for a long time, but our first game was actually for the Nintendo 64. Rocket, Robot on Wheels, a lighthearted physics-based platformer starring a plucky maintenance robot who has to rescue a theme park from the dastardly clutches of a criminally minded raccoon. After 2 years of hard work, a smattering of critical success, and a somewhat tepid response from the game-buying public, we took one important thing away from the project: criminally minded raccoon. I mean, if you think about it, trash pandas are little thieves patrolling around for garbage or grapes regardless of your thoughts on the matter, unless you go out of your way to feed them. Well, the real reason for why Sucker Punch had chosen a raccoon as their next game star was a bit of circular logic. The main villain of Rocket was a raccoon, and a funny visual gag. Fleming tells Game Informer that the sight gag of a raccoon putting on a mask somehow seemed super funny to us. That was it. That was the decision to make Sly Cooper right there. A now wizened up Sucker Punch had a far easier time securing a publisher solely because they knew how the industry worked. Yet they still shopped Sly Cooper around to a few different publishers other than Ubisoft, mostly because in swing was the third mascot boom. Fleming recalls to Game Informer that, at the time, we felt that if you looked at the successful platformers, the ones that really broke out and became iconic, 100% of them were published by a console stakeholder. The console owner was the publisher. And with an already positive relationship with Grady Hunt, it was simple for Sucker Punch to choose Sony. They simplified a lot of the design work because Sly was going to be console exclusive. A tale as old as time did manage to creep up on Sucker Punch, however, as Sly Cooper's development did have its own pitfalls on both the narrative and technical fronts. Since the game was going to be mostly aimed at kids, having the main star be a thief kinda worried Sucker Punch, as they thought kids would replicate the actions of their character. As Zimmerman humorously writes in his blog post, working on the Sly games was tons of fun, but if you make a game for kids about a master thief and his friends pulling off crazy heists, you can't help worrying that the message you're sending to the youth of the world is, hey kids, stealing is cool. Which would be the worst public service announcement ever, Eventually, we decided that Sly was such a skillful thief that he only steals from other thieves, and explained this rule in the first 5 minutes of the game. We crossed our fingers and managed to not trigger a tweener crime wave. Whew! There were also some issues with level structure, as none of the beta testers could finish the first level, which was incidentally a stage from Panda King's section, forcing Sucker Punch to switch level order and thus cementing Panda King as the 4th member of the Fiendish Five. To make the game stand out more against the third boom backdrop, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, which was made up Latin, was rendered using a style called Toon-Shading. Explaining to 1UP, Fleming describes the term with animated movies, especially the classics, feature beautiful painterly backgrounds with fairly simple shaded outline characters in the foreground. With Sly, we tried to make a real-time video game that looked like this, so we use a different rendering approach for the characters than we do for the backgrounds. Typical cel-shaded games will use a consistent look for the foregrounds and backgrounds, which we really like, but it's just different than the approach we took. While in the middle of development, Sucker Punch hoped that the game would sell at least 500,000 to allow for a sequel. They got that and more. Not only did the game sell 1 million copies between its North American release in 2002 and PAL release in 2003, both on the PlayStation 2, no duh, mostly because of its inclusion in the greatest hits line of Sony games, as the initial response to Sly was somewhat poor due to Ratchet and Jack. Sucker Punch's name started cropping up in talks with the likes of Naughty Dog and Insomniac. As Zimmerman says in Game Informer's history of Sucker Punch, it was a flattering comparison because those guys make great games, but at that point we felt a little like the junior partner in a law firm. By the end of the Sly trilogy, we felt like we were pulling our weight a little more. As opposed to playing the original version on the PlayStation 2 via emulation, I used the Sanzaru developed Sly Cooper collection that contains the first 3 entries. A little tidbit on Sanzaru, they mostly do porting jobs, and a Polygon article calls them a dedicated group of Sly Cooper fans, as they did bring to fruition Sly 4, so swings and roundabouts, I guess. That game's narrative fucking sucks. Our tale opens up one night in Paris, a sly raccoon positioning himself on a rooftop for a daring heist as his associates, a nerdy turtle and somewhat fearful hippo, chime in to tell him he's free to start. This is Sly Cooper, last living heir to the Cooper clan, and he's breaking into Interpol officer Carmelita Fox's office to find his case file.
Engineers, buddy. Got their security system totally scoped. To get inside, you're gonna have to go through that air vent.
All right, I'm going in.
And don't forget you got me at the wheel, Sly. All you gotta do is grab the file and get back to the van. We'll do the rest.
Just keep that engine running, Murray. I'll be down in no time.
Way to go, Sly. This is where Inspector Carmelita Fox stashes all her important files. I hacked into the police security mainframe and discovered this vault's combo. Try dialing in 937.
Nice job! You got it! If you come down through the fire escape and head through the parking lot, we'll be waiting in the getaway van.
Stealing it while engaging in a bit of banter with Carmelita herself, Sly escapes to provide us, the audience, his backstory.
Criminal! You foolish raccoon. I've caught you red-handed.
Ah, Carmelita. I haven't seen you since I gave you the slip in Bombay.
Which reminds me, you need to return the Firestone of India to its rightful owners.
And I was gonna give it to you as a little token of my... Hey, you know, that bazooka really brings out the color of your eyes. Very fetching.
You think? This pistol packs a paralyzing punch. You ought to try it. Might snap you out of your crime spree.
And give up our little rendezvous?
Plenty of time for that once you're safely behind bars.
Love to stick around and chat, but I just dropped by to pick up this case file. I think you've had it long enough.
with me, raccoon?
The Cooper clan is a long-lived line of thieves, making their name by stealing from other criminals. A master thief, in Sly's words, is someone who can rip off other thieves as there's no honor or skill in robbing regular people. The Cooper family tree is so huge that the clan has dedicated a book to themselves, the Thievius Raccoonus. Part historical document, part manual, if incidental, it details each exploit of a given ancestor. The night Sly was supposed to inherit his family's legacy from his father, a group called the Fiendish Five launched an attack on the Coopers, killing Sly's dad and ripping up the Thievius Raccoonus into 5 large chunks and several smaller pages. Fleeing from the scene, the Fiendish Five left Sly an orphan.
Supposed to inherit the book, 5 visitors came unannounced to our door. My father fought to protect us, but the gang of villains known as the Fiendish Five overpowered him and ransacked our house until they found the Thievius Raccoonus. Our family's manual of thieving greatness fell into their filthy hands. They tore the book into 5 pieces and split it up, each villain disappearing to the farthest corners of the world to commit dastardly crimes.
Dumped off at a local home, Sly met Bentley and Murray, the turtle and hippo from earlier, and the 3 became fast friends and thieving partners, forming the modern-day version of the Cooper gang. Now an adult and with his friends, Sly aims to reclaim the lost pages of his legacy, either becoming a master thief in the process or biting the dust. These 3 buddies, and coincidentally Carmelita Fox, are up against the 5 fiends. They, the aristocrat-turned-pirate Sir Raleigh the Frog.
As a young man, this hot-tempered frog grew bored of his life of luxury and privilege. On a whim, he tried his hand at a bit of piracy and found it to his liking.
The wimp-turned-gangster Mugshot.
Next up, the notorious Mugshot, ruthless muscle of the Fiendish Five. What he lacked in brains, he definitely made up for in brawn. Turns out he wasn't always that way. He grew up as the run of the litter.
The exiled Ms. Ruby.
Born into a family of mystics, other children found her scary. Teaching herself to summon the undead provided what few friends she had. A career in crime allowed an adult Ms. Ruby to punish the world for fearing her as a child.
The humiliated turned angry Panda King.
Born penniless, he was fascinated by the fireworks rich noblemen set off every New Year's. He spent a decade learning the art. But when he tried to offer his fireworks to the noblemen, they couldn't see past his shabby clothes and chased him away. Humiliated, the Panda King took revenge on those who shunned him by using the very tools of his art for crime.
And the Fiendish Clockwork.
While looking over what little information I had on the final member of the Fiendish Five, I began to notice something. In the 4 parts of the Thievius Raccoonus recovered so far, several of the pictures depict a shadowy owl-like figure, which looks very similar to the police images of the mysterious Clockwork.
While the first 4 were standard crime doers, this whole entire situation was set up by Clockwork as a means of proving that the only reason why the Cooper clan has persisted for so long is because of their precious book. Oh yeah, he's an immortal mechanical owl that has lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years because of his raging hatred and jealousy of the Coopers fueling his life. He replaced his own flesh and blood with robot parts, if that tells you anything.
Sly! Behind you!
Sly Cooper, you have escaped my gas chamber and destroyed my death ray. Remarkable. You Coopers always find a way to beat me.
Always? So that was you in the background of all those old pictures in the Thievius Raccoonus. How old are you?
Perfection has no age.
What? You're immortal?
Revenge is the prime ingredient in the fountain of youth. I've kept myself alive for hundreds of years with a steady diet of jealousy and hate, awaiting a day when I would finally eclipse your family's thieving reputation.
Sly! My missiles don't hurt him but seem to create holes in his armor. Shoot into the gaps I create!
Nice shooting, Sly! You got him! Wow, that's one tough owl.
I don't get it. You're so familiar with my family. You must have known my father had a son. If you hated the Cooper so much, why did you let me live when you stole the Thievius Raccoonus?
Because I wanted to show the world that without your precious book, the Cooper line was nothing.
Ah, well, there's where you're wrong. The Thievius Raccoonus doesn't create great thieves. It takes great thieves to create the Thievius Raccoonus.
Enough, Sly Cooper. It ends here. I will finish you like I finished your father. And the Cooper line will be erased, and the only master thief will be Clockwork.
One slight detail, however, that Clockwork overlooked is that, well, you become a master thief via experience. Sly is the proof of that. With help from all his friends and Carmelita, Sly puts down Clockwork before snogging the fox, both because the two's relationship is closer than Carmelita would like to admit, she's a massive tsundere for Sly, and a means of giving her the slip.
I had taken down each member of the Fiendish Five. Raleigh, Mugshot, Ms. Ruby, the Panda King, and finally Clockwork. I'd beaten them all one by one and reclaimed my birthright. Of course, there was no way I could have gotten here without the help of my pals. I know this hasn't been easy for them, yet they stuck with me through it all. Murray, boy, it took a lot of guts for him to get out in the field with me. I know he was scared, but he's got more heart than anyone I've ever known. And thank goodness for Bentley. Without his expertise, I'd have never found my way off that rooftop in Paris. A guy couldn't ask for a better gang of friends. Who could ever forget the lovely Carmelita? Looks like we're not going to be friends anymore. Now that Clockwork's death ray is out of commission, we're back to playing cops and robbers. I thought for sure she was going to slap the handcuffs on me right then and there. But instead, she was true to her word and gave me that 10-second head start. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I felt bad leaving her stranded on that giant rock, but I knew it wouldn't be long before we'd see each other again.
Our story ends, however, with the reveal that Clockwork isn't truly dead. His hate chip and parts still intact. Despite Sly 1's nature as a coming-of-age story, mostly because Sly earns the name Cooper by retrieving the missing pages and beating the Fiendish Five, what propels the story into the limelight is the solid characterization. From the word go, Sly paints the picture of cool, calm, and collected. He never raises his voice even when angered, and he's a smooth talker and schmoozer, easily deflecting Carmelita's copisms with corny, though admittedly honest, words of fondness. He's not a common thug or a traditional criminal mastermind. If anything, he's a thrill seeker wanting to prove he's the best at what he does by outsmarting other criminals and stealing their ill-gotten gains. That wrinkle provides such an interesting dilemma and breathes a lot of life into Sly's relationship both of his rogues gallery as well as Carmelita. On paper, Sly and Carmelita are on the same side, though their professions force them to clash against the other. Carmelita's naivete also blinding her to the big picture until she runs into Clockwork. On the up and up, Sly and Carmelita will always go back to their game of cops and robbers, but if there is a bigger threat at large, the two won't hesitate to team up with strings attached, and it's easily proven that Carmelita does have feelings for old Ringtail, what with the nickname, the fact that she doesn't bat away Sly's words and plays into them, or that when she did get kissed by Sly, it's very obvious that she wasn't going to push him away. If they weren't on opposite sides of the law, the two would be together, hinting at what would happen during the ending of 3. Keep that point lingering in your head as I'll come back to it. Sly compared to the Fiendish Five is another interesting contrast because besides Clockwork's pure metal hatred for the Cooper clan, our raccoon could have ended up like any of the other members post his father's execution. Whether engulfed by anger or bored with his mastery, Cooper's a lot closer to Raleigh, Mugshot Ruby, and Panda King more than he would like to admit. However, what separates Cooper from the other criminals is that he has a solid foundation. Bentley and Murray. Despite the two's idiosyncrasies that would be touched upon within 2, the bond between the three is the heart of the Cooper gang, the reason why Sly hasn't fallen to the dark side of thieving. They are the rock that the other Fiendish Five members lack. Then there's the parallel between Sly and Clockwork. With his cold computer logic, Clockwork has come to the conclusion that the only reason why the Cooper clan has stood the test of time is because of the Thievius Raccoonus. In all other categories, Clockwork views himself superior as he has far outlived any member of the Cooper clan solely because of his hatred for them. Sly, meanwhile, proves that the reason why the book exists isn't to spread the secrets of the clan, but to archive them, to prove that the Cooper clan existed. Yes, reading from the Thievius Raccoonus will instill thieving knowledge to the reader, but as Sly says, it takes great thieves to write the Thievius Raccoonus. Literally anyone could have written it, thus calling attention to both Clockwork's one-sided hate and how more historical the text is. Despite finding the key to immortality, a steady diet of jealousy and hate, what does Clockwork have to show? What would he do after he theoretically killed Sly? Clockwork at his core is a victim of his own logic, as instead of building his own reputation as a mastermind criminal, he's merely a footnote in another clan's history because he believes that thieves can only be made through transferring down skill, not by environmental circumstances. You know, like the other members of the Fiendish Five. Which, again, calls attention to the fact that the Thievius Raccoonus, at the basis level, is just a family's history, a record to build upon and tell your grandchildren about, which is ultimately what would befall the Thievius Raccoonus post this game. For a final point on Clockwork, what is his purpose without a Cooper? Rounding back to the pin I left earlier to keep in your mind, Sly 1 creates a solid framework that allows for both call forwards and call backs, little character moments that would be built upon to further the ongoing narrative in the franchise. While Bentley and Murray are a part of the Cooper gang, this is Sly Show, which would change going into the next title. Sly 1 is very much the humble beginnings for the group leading into their big breakout come Band of Thieves. I think one aspect that makes Sly stand out against its third boom peers is the art direction and presentation. Before I get to that though, I will have to bring up the quality of the collection port, as its presentation suffers from oddities not within the original PlayStation 2 release. This mostly crops up as weird modeling gaffes, such as animation stuttering or replaying, like eyes twitching, or odd texture clipping. You can see the texture mask on Sly during any cutscene that he's talking to another character within the world, not within the Byakucom. Sound, while relatively unscathed for the most part, has some failings of its own, like with the staticky popping within Duel by the Dragon and the desync for the Ms. Ruby fight. All in all, this isn't a masterful port job, though out of the 3 games within the collection, Sly 1 suffers the least.
Quite true. Why don't I have my servant Chumley escort you over here?
Alright, what's the catch?
Oh, not much. Just a little game I like to play with all my annoying guests. I want to see how well you pay attention.
What do you mean?
Well, I'll unleash my mighty mojo magic upon you. If you repeat what I do, you'll dodge it just fine. If not, you'll get zapped.
A little voodoo Simon Says, huh? Sounds easy enough.
Granted, some of you probably already knew how kinda iffy this collection was if you have experience with either the Ratchet & Clank or Jak and Daxter collections. With that lengthy foreword out of the way, Out of the main three of the third mascot boom, which to me is Ratchet, Jack, and Sly, visually speaking, Sly stands out the most. Now that makes sense in a development way, as Insomniac and Naughty Dog did share secrets during the development for both their mascot games, but because Sucker Punch was essentially on their own, they were able to craft a stylized world heavy with cel shading that makes it seem like you're playing an animated movie. What brings a lot of the visual style together is that each world plays heavily to a theme, as enemies, environmental objects, hell, even the faces of coins change from world to world. It feels like you're on this grand globe-trotting adventure to get back to Thievius Raccoonus, and even within the worlds themselves, there are subsets pertaining to specific stages. Take Raleigh's world, for example. Typical pirate affair with stages drowning in water and treasure, but then comes in the fire and furnace of his grand machine.
Sword down there. It appears there's a prowler on the premises. And if any of you let him get his hands on that key, I'll personally flog the lot of you for an entire fortnight.
Mugshot has the casino-inspired areas sitting next to slum alleyways and neon-lit rooftops.
I'm getting in, but look out for those guards. Mugshot's got those machine gun-toting dogs hunting like a pack.
I will say that not all the worlds are like this, as Ms. Ruby, Panda King, and Clockwork all play heavily to one idea, horror, snow, and volcano respectively, but that doesn't mean their worlds aren't interesting. The swamps of Haiti crawling with bugs and ghosts is a decidedly spooky time, while the mountaintops of China are serene when fireworks aren't being used to bury villages. Clockwork's world, despite sitting in the heart of a volcano, hits how heavily vain he is, most of his structures fashioned into his image or adopting a bird of prey visage. While character designs haven't hit their peak yet for the franchise, as I do prefer later incarnations of Bentley and Murray, what is on offer here is amazing for a sophomore release. From the main cast right down to the goons, there's a lot of charm here when there isn't the lingering, threatening aura. By far, my favorite design out of the bunch is Clockwork, from the way he's presented within cutscenes as this looming, almost overbearing shadow to the real deal adopting a much more monstrous yet robotic veneer that wasn't let on with his silhouette. He embodies the image of a bird of prey gone mad. A cold, logical machine divorced from whatever he once was. If he wasn't naturally born an owl, you would mistake him for a mechanical fiend, bereft of any emotions besides contempt and superiority. Even the way he moves, despite appearing natural, adds another clashing layer. A robot as large as Clockwork shouldn't move like an owl. Compare this to how Sly moves, which is tricksy to the nth degree, appropriate for his occupation, but doesn't bend the laws of nature. Except for the double jump. There is a fluidity to Sly's movements that is precise, but not in the uncomfortable way. You can tell he learned how to carry himself as a thief, unlike Clockwork's too acute actions born from automation. What puts this game into the upper echelon of game presentation is the music, sound, and voice work. Ashif Hakik outdid himself for this one, as a lot of the music within Sly 1 takes advantage of the world themes while also going wild with the samples. Within the first hub world, Hakik uses a foghorn as part of the backing track, and the combat theme within Mugshots' stage uses vocal samples of someone saying bow wow to play up the dog motif. When that isn't the case, Hakik plays heavily to the idea of thieving music, slower jazz pieces to offset the more bombastic alert and combat tracks. Segueing this to the sound, you know you're in for a real treat when one of the common pieces of game audio you'll hear is the light strumming of piano strings. Whenever you are near an enemy or performing a wall saddle, Sly's footsteps are audiolized as the traditional cartoon sneaking sound effect, adding a bit of hilarity to sneaking around while also providing a gauge of how close you are to an enemy. It goes away once you have either been spotted or if there's no one around, so it's a nifty way to non-verbally tell the player if they are close to danger or not. By far the standout, however, is the voice work. Kevin Miller's Sly Cooper is as smooth as he is calm. Nothing really gets under his skin, and he always has a quick zinger or quip to fire, whether in jest against his foes or his romantic interest. He's cocky, but not in that frustrating way. He believes himself to be up to the challenge even when others try to dissuade him, like with the case of Matt Olson's Bentley and Chris Murphy's Murray.
Well, look who just walked into my crosshairs. Sly Cooper.
About time you showed up, Miss Fox. Was getting worried about you. Thought you took a wrong turn somewhere back in Paris.
The only one making wrong turns is you, Sly. I'd suggest you surrender before I paralyze you with my good friend, the shock pistol.
Now see, a girl whose best friend's a firearm's got issues. A little dinner, a little dancing. I think I can help you out.
Sounds romantic. As long as you don't mind dining in jail.
Nah, I hear the service is lousy.
Once I catch you, you'll know for yourself.
Sorry, Sly, but this is one mission you will have to accomplish without me.
You don't believe in ghosts, do you?
Sure I do. My scanners have picked up verifiable paranormal activity. But that's not the problem. This swamp is oozing with disgusting mold and bacteria.
Suck it up, Bentley. We got work to do.
All right, then. Don't forget to use the new move you learned from Mugshot's section of the Thievius Raccoonus.
You mean the raccoon rail walk?
The roots and vines around here are perfect for that. All you gotta do is
jump and hit the circle button.
especially where you see the bark has been worn away, and where it's super slick from icky slime and moss. You'll rail slide like a skater grinding pipe.
I'm liking it.
I will say that Sly does take up a majority of the screen time, all the wonderful title cards animated in their own rough animatic style reminiscent of classical movies only say Sly Cooper in, but both provide a solid foundation for later character development. Who really steals the show is Kevin Blackton, voicing 4 of the 5 fiends. Man has considerable range, from Raleigh's laid-back anger to Mugshot's aggressive if somewhat loquacious dialect, to Panda King's slower, almost respectful manner of speaking, to Clockwork's cold menace.
How delightful! We have a guest. The only thing is, I hate unexpected guests!
Listen, Raleigh, wipe up my family and steal what's mine? You better expect company.
Oh, I'm ever so sorry. How sloppy of me not to finish the job. Obviously, we should have snuffed you out as well. So, without further ado, let me make amends by what? Bloating to gargantuan size and squashing you like the insignificant bug that you are!
Bring it on.
What? My boys have been yapping about some big mysterious dude running around cracking skulls and this is it? You're the monkey wrench in my operation? Some scrawny rat with a stick? Hey, wait a second. I seen that stick before.
Maybe when my father knocked your block off with it.
Your father? Wow! You're a Cooper? You know, that Thievius Raccoonus had a lot of nice pictures, but way too many big words.
So you don't mind just handing it over?
What? What, are you kidding? You break into my place, steal my stuff, trash the joint. I feel transgressed and violated. Let's rock!
I see you carry Kane of Notorious Cooper Thief Clan. Have you come here for revenge? To steal back the Thievius Raccoonus?
That was my plan at first, but now I'm more interested in putting an end to your avalanche extortion racket.
Why should you care if I bury a few worthless village in snow? You are a thief, just like me.
No, that's only half right. I am a thief from a long line of master thieves, while you're just a frustrated firework artist turned homicidal pyromaniac.
Insolent child. You shall pay dearly for your disrespect. Still, to honor your Cooper ancestry, I will send you to your doom with the beauty of my new firework technique, Flame Foo.
I will always remember the lines, "Perfection has no age, and revenge is the prime ingredient in the fountain of youth." R.I.P. Kevin Blackton. Roxana Ortega does a fine job as Carmelita as well, the actress's first ever role, which couldn't have been easy for her. She has a somewhat adorable rapport with Sly, playing up their cops and robbers relationship while still caring deeply for her ringtail. Granted, Ortega would not return for later games, as no one could settle on the voice of Carmelita Montoya Fox. All in all, Sly achieves everything a mascot platformer needs to stand out, and more. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is a mascot platformer that focuses on linear level design while throwing in a few minigames here and there to spice up your time with it. On the difficulty side of things, Sly Cooper is definitely on the easier side, with generous checkpoints, a somewhat superfluous life system, and a pity system for dying enough times in a stage. Tackling level structure first this time around, starting Sly Cooper off sees you in the prologue, a sort of staging ground that grants you a preview of how worlds work in this game. Mostly because when you select one, with new ones unlocked only after you beat a previous one, you are dumped into what I will dub the approach level. To actually get into a world proper, you have to beat this approach level, which, like all the rest of the regular stages in a world, is a straight A to B affair with some slight sprinklings of exploration. There are only a few collectibles in the game, those being coins, lucky charms, and clues. To break away from level structure for the moment, Sly has the constitution of a wet paper towel. If any enemy merely sneezes on him, Sly falls apart quicker than my IQ at a Monster Girl convention. To circumvent this, Sly can find lucky charms either free-floating in a stage or by collecting 100 coins. These grant him an additional hit, with charms stacking up to 2. Note that if you already have 2 lucky charms, level charms won't spawn in, and getting 100 coins grants you an extra life, with these being found in the hub levels, though some do exist in the stages. Enemies themselves are equally as fragile, only one requiring multiple hits to defeat. Guards are separated into 2 categories, flashlights and stationary. Do your best to avoid being seen by flashlights before you attack them, as they are always accurate when they go to hit you. Stationary guards vary much more, some having projectiles, some chasing after Sly, so use common sense. There are also level hazards like spotlights and lasers that start off yellow before tripping into red. Yellow is essentially a mulligan, but touching red will damage you. Destroying the alarm connected to the laser or spotlight will shut them off, however. The most common of the collectibles are coins. Not only are they found lying about everywhere, but they are also dropped by enemies and when you smash environmental objects. You are never in any danger of running out of coins because you can't go 2 feet without tripping over one. one. The most important collectibles, however, are the treasure keys and clue bottles. Treasure keys are the power stars of the game. You need all 7 from a world to challenge the boss, and you usually need 3 to open up the entire world and all the levels. That's all the importance of the treasure keys, as they don't do anything else. Clues, meanwhile, are optional in each of the standard stages, but collecting all, ranging from 20 to 40, gives you the vault combination for the one in the stage and a piece of the Thievius Raccoonus, or in layman terms, a new ability for Sly such as a dive attack, invulnerability to falling into pits or water, or time warping shenanigans. While I have said that the clues are not mandatory, getting the second ending of the game requires you to find them all, forcing you to replay a stage as the last vault is coded in Owl dialect and is only unlocked after you beat Clockwork. Finished with the longest tangent in existence, a stage is finished when you collect a treasure key, but outside of certain points of no return, you can run up and down a stage at your leisure to find hidden clues or coins. Trust me, you will want to take advantage of this as some clues are pretty well hidden. Anytime you finish a stage, whether getting through the approach or completing a level within a world, you return back to the hub where you can select your next stage or unlock the path to the boss with your keys. One thing the game doesn't tell you that if you have completed a stage, you can fast warp to it via the map menu. Stages themselves are broken up into a few categories, the most common being the Sly-centric stages where you must traverse from A to B to get a key, but sometimes you might have to play a minigame such as shooting at crabs or hitting chickens, protecting Murray as he makes a mad dash towards a key, or participating in vehicle sections such as the races or mobile turret stages. Either way, you will have to play all stages in a world to unlock the boss, except for Clockwork's world, which is entirely linear. Sly himself has some basic moves within his repertoire, such as a double jump and being able to swing his cane, but he also has access to context-sensitive moves, usually earmarked by glowing blue sparkles. By hitting the circle button, or jumping and then hitting it, Sly will perform a master thief move such as the spire jump or rail slide, but only after he has defeated a prerequisite boss. Don't worry, bosses always give you what you'll need for the next world. There's also the Binocucom, but it is surplus to charge here, unlike how it would be implemented in Sly 2 onward. Dying in Sly respawns you either at a checkpoint, which don't save level progress but do for clue bottles, or at the beginning of a stage unless you run out of lives. The minigames are different besides protecting Murray or Sly, as if either die, you lose a life. I don't know what happens if you game over, as lives are so plentiful and death so easily avoidable except in rare occasions. Dying enough times in a stage will give you a pity lucky charm, a feature I didn't use outside of the final climb, and that's because I messed up earlier in the Clockwork levels and lost both my charms. Bosses are pretty varied, with each one having their own way of fighting, as with Raleigh and Panda King, you directly engage with them, while Mugshot has you solve a light puzzle, Ms. Ruby is Parappa the Rappa, and Clockwork is a vehicle level. To round out the gameplay, after you beat a stage, you unlock the Master Thief Run, a speed run of a stage to unlock the commentary tracks and additional movies for your enjoyment. Beating the game also unlocks the Japanese opening movie, a hinting for things to come when Sucker Punch would develop Ghost of Tsushima. What appeals to me within Sly Cooper is how well the mechanics of the game flow with the level structure. Since the main selling point of Sly was acrobatics and pulling off thieving moves, the fact that most of how you interact with and traverse the stages through these moves brings me a lot of joy, whether cleverly avoiding spotlights or lasers with a well-timed jump or usage of a thief move. You feel like this master burglar able to sneak in and out of any location without any problems. And what helps this is the sense of progression Sly Cooper has. At first, all you can do is saddle walls and climb up pipes and ladders. Then you can start doing spire jumps, rail walks, and turning invisible, which spices up the environmental challenges. Because each world opens up with an approach, you get drip-fed the new action you've learned before having to slot it between your other moves as you get deeper into a level set. Ms. Ruby might have my favorite design choices for the entire game, as it constructs pathways that take full advantage of Sly's moveset. Whether jumping on slick vines, transitioning into rail walks, or ring hanging, the game doesn't skimp out on testing your mettle. Panda King's world is chock full of moments like this as well, with timed spire jumps avoiding fire spurts, transitioning to climbing or grinding. The only ability that kinda gets lost in the shuffle is invisibility, as it is situational and enemies aren't too dangerous, but just the capability to become transparent, or better yet, having the ability to walk while cloaked, is such a fun gameplay idea. Speaking of, Sly's unlockable abilities are pretty fun to engage with. While the best to me is either any of the negate damage ones, as making a misstep no longer hurts you in the long run, the dive of its high priority, the decoy for dealing with tricky groupings, the roll for extra speed, or legitimate time stop that stuns everyone for a few moments, all have their own place within Sly's moveset. While I didn't use the hat bomb at all, it can safely deal with enemies on a lower area if Sly is above them. It can also be used as a mine to deal with large groupings like with Decoy. That's another part of the game I enjoy, your own approach. Do you take the safer path, soundly dealing with foes in a methodical manner as you traipse around the world, or do you barrel through Daredevil style? Levels are for the most part large enough to hide away clues, but short enough to easily beat in less than 2 minutes, forming the basis for the Master Thief runs. And while I didn't toy with them, you unlock dev commentary for accomplishing part times, which in my eyes is one of the greatest unlockables for a game. This also means that some of the weaker stages don't go on for too long. Sly 1 wants to keep you always moving and guessing, surprising you with new locales and enemies to explore and deal with. All the bosses are a highlight, my favorites being Miss Ruby for a somewhat interesting take on Simon Says, and Clockwork for his decidedly epic showdown in the middle of a volcano. All the while he and Sly roast each other, though I have already gone over how much I love the presentation. That said, a few lines did get a chuckle from me, whether intentionally or not. The first barrel level has Sly comment on some rat deaths by saying that they got pegged, a double meaning for those in the know. That is one word that has been corrupted for me. Mugshot's brief dip into long-windedness always cracks me up, as turns out the dog who skipped leg day has a somewhat verbose side to him. Sly's insult to Panda King is top tier and was later reused for honor among thieves. You frustrated firework artist turned homicidal pyromaniac. For an understated credit, the game's willingness for experimentation can be applauded. While it may not work out 100% of the time, I'll see you in bad, testing out the waters is not a bad idea, figuring out what works and what doesn't. We got the Bentley hacking minigame out of this game for Sly 2 and 3, and while the later barrel missions in those games can be somewhat annoying, Sly 1's rendition of them are fun to splice into the regular levels. I'm gonna open up with a complaint that probably won't apply to everyone, mostly because this stems from the days of younger me and his dislike of what I will dub creepy enemies. For a sampler, younger Noah disliked Fracture Hills from Spyro 2 not because 100%ing that stage was a pain in the ass. No, it's because of the killer bushes and vindictive trees. Something about both those enemies riled him something fierce, and to this day I still have an active dislike of both foes. Swinging this round to Sly Cooper, those damn mosquitoes. Most of you probably see Clarence Dupree and think, wacky bug enemies suck blood, but I see my night terrors for the next week. Deep within my primal subconscious, tucked away in my primordial fears, I see Clarence spitting out my blood in disgust and taunting me, and I'm a fearless blob. For real though, this is hard to quantify, as even explaining my reasoning is a bit hard for me, as this stems back to my formative years. Sometimes what you're afraid of is a bit silly and not easily explainable. On a gameplay front, Clarence might be the most annoying enemy, as his hitbox is a bit jank. 9 times out of 10, he'll manage to get the first blow even as you're swinging like a madman to swat him down. His attack has so few frames that it's hard to tell when he has an active hitbox capable of damaging you. Most of the time when dealing with the bloodsucker, I use decoys, as his taunt period is so long that you can score an easy kill. None of the other enemies ever reach this tier of annoyance, and even then this is a minor complaint. If anything, the worst aspects of Sly 1 are the minigames, and that's because they are hit or miss. The escorts aren't the worst thing ever, mostly because you can bring in Lucky Charms, but it does suck that there are no checkpoints, and accidentally pegging Murray or Sly is an instant kill. The races are all pretty abysmal due to the car's physics sucking a fat one, and that the only way to win is by using nitro, which the other racers can smash, dooming you outright. The turrets are a-okay, they aren't anything special, and the misc vehicles can range from frustrating, the crab minigame the worst of the bunch, overwhelming to the point that one little mistake will cause a restart, to somewhat enjoyable as I do enjoy the swamp skiff. Surprisingly, the chicken minigame gave me no trouble despite its reputation of being a ballbuster, suffering the same problems as the crab minigame, being especially time narrow with one mishap starting you from the beginning. Indeed, most of my actual problems with the game stem from the port job, and that's because it isn't faithful to the original. Out of all the technical issues, such as glitches not existing from the original and weird character tearing, the most egregious example of this version of Sly 1 being a bad port is the Miss Ruby fight. In the original game, her button prompts are synced up with the music to provide a beat for you to follow, thus easing you into the change of pace. That isn't the case for the collection version, as her attacks are noticeably offbeat to the point of actually screwing you over. While I could ignore the glitches and strange model clipping, this is honestly inexcusable. While Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus isn't my go-to game in the franchise, I mostly waffle a bit between Band of Thieves and Honor Among Thieves, it's still a solid platformer with tons of charm. Level design is straightforward, but still rewards exploration with clues and coins. The bosses are all quite memorable, and the stellar presentation, when not being let down by the port job, is superb. My only complaints are that when Sly does decide to deviate from the main gameplay style, it can be hit or miss, but these moments rarely overstay their welcome. Emulation is probably the easiest way to play this game unless you are willing to find the collection, though that has its own pitfalls. This is going to leave me wondering if I can fit another video in between the time of now and 1,000 subscribers. Again, I'm not going to give too much away for what that is, merely that I have referenced it in the past and even within this video. As such, when it does come time for that round of guesswork, I won't provide a usual hint that I do to keep you guys on your heels. It's funner that way, mostly because it's going to be an epic video, so why not keep you guys mostly in the dark? Well, except those in the inner circle, but they've mostly stayed out of the game solely because I talk to them on a regular basis. With that said, this showing of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving the hottest time period for a niche product, a sequel to an already classic game, and a fan favorite gaming engine.